Alright, so here Ryan's piggy bank contains 5 times as many dimes as quarters, for a total value of $2.25. If Q represents the number of quarters, that's our first variable, Q is the number of quarters, that makes sense, what equation could be used to find the number of quarters in Ryan's piggy bank? So, with a question like this, we want to break it into pieces. It's a little bit tough at first, but we can do it. We can handle it, right? And we know that whatever we have here, whatever Ryan has, we have to follow these rules. His bank contains 5 times as many dimes as quarters. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, a dime, we could use the variable d, but notice in all of these answers down here, the only variable we see is q. So whatever we think of as in terms of dimes, right, d for dimes, we're defining that in terms of quarters, right? So the number of dimes, right, whatever number of quarters we have q, the number of dimes is 5 times that, right? So 5 times whatever number of quarters we have is the number of dimes. So instead of writing d, right, for dimes, we're going to write 5 times quarters. That's how we will represent dimes in this bank. And we know that the total value of all the coins in the bank is $2.25, but they're writing that in terms of pennies. So $2.25 would equal 225 pennies, right? So we're starting to break this problem down. Instead of writing dimes, instead of writing dollars, we're writing quarters and pennies. So what equation could be used to find the number of quarters in Ryan's piggy bank? Let's take a look. Here, 25 times q, what would that mean? Well, that means that every quarter you have, let's say you have 1 quarter, that's equal to 1 times 25, right? 25 times q, or 25 times 1. That's because 1 quarter equals 25 pennies. If we have 2 quarters, 2 times 25 would be 50 pennies. So 25q, when you see that appear in these equations, right, that's just telling you the number of quarters you have equals this amount of money. It's the rate, right, or the value, the number of pennies, 25, times the number of quarters. And that makes sense, because if you have 3 quarters, again, right, that would be 3 quarters times 25, or 3 times 25 is 75 cents. That's just defining the number of quarters. Now what we add to that is 10 times 5q. Now this seems a little difficult, but again, 5q is just the number of dimes, right? We established that right up here. So why would it be 10 times 5q? Well, for the same reason up here that we use with quarters, except now we're dealing with dimes. If you think about dimes, you would write, oh, every dime is worth 10 pennies. So 10 times the number of dimes equals the number of pennies you have. Number of pennies. Right? Because we're defining all of this in pennies. That's what happened here when we turned the dollars into pennies. So here again, 10 times d, that just means the number of pennies, right, times the dimes, gives you the total number of pennies based on dimes. If I have 3 dimes, I have 3 times 10, or 30 pennies. And what we're doing here is we're not writing 10 times d, we're writing 10 times 5q. But that's really the same equation, right? Because 10 times 5q is just the number of dimes, that's what we established right here, is 10 times dimes. And that's related to the quarters. And if we add up all these things, we know we have to get, right, a total value of 225 pennies. So in fact, I would pick A for my answer, right? 25 pennies for each quarter plus 10 pennies for each dime. But the number of dimes is 5 times as many, right, quarters. And that's 225. And we can even solve this, right? So let's just solve it real quickly to see how this makes sense. 25q plus 50q, 10 times 5 is 50, is 75q, and that equals 225. Divide both sides by 75, and what happens? Well, 75 divided by 75 is 1, and the number of quarters would equal this. And this might seem difficult at first, but 75 times 2 is 150, right? So then one more 75, right, would be 225. So the number of quarters we have is 3 quarters, and this makes sense, right? 3 quarters, right, would equal 75 cents. 75 cents equals 3 quarters. Now, we need to get up to 225, so how many dimes are there? Well, 5q equals the number of dimes. So q equals 3. So 5 times q, 5 times 3, equals 15. And that's the number of dimes. So there are 150 cents, right, equals 15 dimes, right? And that makes sense because there are 15 dimes is 5 times more than the number of quarters that we have here. Altogether, that's $2.25. So A definitely works. If you look through the other ones, you'll see they don't make as much sense. For example, look at C. It says 10Q. Well, why would that make sense? Right? 10 times Q just tells you it's 10 pennies for every quarter, and that can't be right. Here in D, 10Q again appears, and for the same reason that can't be right. In B, you might think that this is making sense, but again, 10Q appears. So that one flaw is appearing over and over again. And in fact, 5 times 10Q would give you 50Q, which is what we got in the first equation, but 5 times 25 does not help us out because that would basically be telling you that you have 125 cents. 5 times 25 is 125, so you have 125 cents for each quarter, and that doesn't make sense either. So here A is the only logical choice. Thanks.